adding in the different files here. So I'm in my multi-track session, and we notice it's not a wave, but it's a session file, SESX. If I want to add in my recorded voice, I can just drag it over, and we can see it adds that in. If I want to add in my music, and it's telling me the settings on that aren't quite the same. Do I want to have it create a version that is at the correct settings? So I will say, yeah, I don't need to see that again, and I will say, okay. And it puts it in, and there's my music, and we can see the music is a much fuller sound than my voice. So if I'm going to play those two simultaneously, I'm probably going to have to do some modifications to how that music plays back. And if I want to bring in my sound effect, I can do that just by dragging that out. So if we look at these, we can see visually now how the audio is occurring. So if you are a visual person, you can go, okay, here's my music, here's my sound effect, there's the recorded voice. It's pretty evident that the recorded voice is not going to stand up well to the music or the loud part of the explosion. If I want to play these, I can just hit the play button down at the bottom and hear what it sounds like. Or I can scrub through the timeline. If I can scrub the timeline to real time, it will actually then sound like the audio is playing. But on something as loud as that music, that's probably not going to be a great idea. And we heard both my voice and the explosion playing back there. So I now have a starting point to play with on my audio. I have my recorded voice, I have my music, I have my sound effect. So it gives us a beginning. Now if I want to only hear one of these, I have these little buttons here, mute, solo, and record. So if I want to not hear the music, I can mute it. I hit the little mute button and we see it grays it out so that the music isn't going to play back. So now if I hit spacebar, that's the same as hitting play. You can see there's no music. This is my first. Apparently I blew myself up. But it's a lot of fun that way. So that's the beginning part of, okay, I have something I don't need to keep listening to. Now, on these tracks, and this is the nice part when you're doing the multi-track, is I can modify the volume to a whole track, or I can do what's called an envelope. The envelope allows me to raise or lower the volume at different points in times and gradually or dramatically, and that really is something that can be a whole lot of fun. So if I look here, I will see that there are a yellow line and a blue line on each one of these tracks. The blue line is for panning, the left or right of the audio. Do I want the audio on the left or do I want the audio on the right? But the yellow line is for volume. 0 is leaving the audio at its base volume. Now if I go to this line and just click on it, it inserts a point. And then I can take that point and adjust it. Now if I pull it down, so minus 20 decibels or dB, we can see that it's pulled it way down, and chances are the sound is going to be all but gone. So is that right there allowed me to taper the music down so that it ducks under the voice. If I want it to come back up, I can click and add a point, add another point, and then I could even make it louder if I decide that I really don't like listening to my own voice. So there's a lot of flexibility here that I can modify just the volume of it. Now I'm going to play a little bit with the panning of it and start out with the music in one channel and then move the music all the way to the other side, just so that we can hear the difference. So doing panning is a really nice way to add in a spatial quality to your audio, so that you can make it sound like something is occurring to the left of the recording or to the right. So you could have one person on one side, one on the other, and you start to feel this sense of it's real space versus just sound. So if we go back, so you can hear the sound traveling from one side to the other as it went from the left to the right side speaker. So that's a nice way that you can play with it. You can do your envelopes for volume, you can do your envelopes for panning, to adjust to things without having to go, oh, well, while I'm recording, I need to suddenly talk a little bit softer. Or then we need to have this, you know, how do I get the music? It's pre-recorded music. I can't say, musicians, play louder. It's recorded already, so we have to do it afterward, and we can do it now digitally on the computer. So we do this basic panning, or I mean volume enveloping to our sound and play with it. So if I decide that I just really like explosions, I can have more than one explosion. I can stack them so that they're over the top of each other. Now, it might be fun to have an explosion on the left and I could have an explosion on the right. So I could envelope that, but we can also just do a complete change to it where we just put the explosion all the way on the right, and then this explosion all the way on the left. So one explosion's on the right, one explosion's on the left. Get rid of the music for now. So now you can start to space things out a little bit, play with it. The only real limit of how you start mixing things together and playing with it is your creativity. And you can play with track after track after track. Now, one thing about doing this is if I've set this track at left 100% or right 100%, I can't decide later on in time that I want it on the same track. I want it to be, well, now I want that track to be the right track instead of the left. It's whatever I set that to, that's the entirety of the track. If I want changes to occur, I need to do like I did to the music here, where I use the panning envelope, and then I can make it first on the right, then on the left, or then in the middle, or then both. So we have options for all of it. So as you record directly in the multi-track, if I record and tracks aren't muted, if I arm a track for recording, so this track is now armed for recording, it's now the active track. I can click on tracks to make these the active tracks. So this is my active track. And if I hit the record button and start recording into the microphone, it's recording, but it's also going to be picking up what the speakers are playing back. Now, if you're in the recording booth, it's not going to be hearing the speakers, but if I'm recording in an open environment, at that point, I have to make sure that the other tracks are silenced so that they don't broadcast their sound into the microphone along with my voice, or I need to be routing all of my playback audio to, say, a pair of headphones so I can hear the sounds, and then I can record into the microphone, and that would be a better option. But sometimes, based on your recording setup, you want to use speakers, external speakers, not to use headphones, because you get a little truer sense to the audio. But if you're recording in the booth, it's not going to be hearing what's playing back on the speakers, so then that's a moot point. Now, as you notice here, it recorded quite nicely at the time I needed it recorded. Now, if I hit the solo button, it does silence those, so then I can go to a different point in time. And if I hit the record button, and we'll see that shift space is record. So if I don't want to hit red because I don't have my mouse over there for whatever reason, shift space. And now I can start recording my next little clip that I need. So I can start recording all of these pieces directly into the multitrack. So if you have your music, if you have a script that someone's going to be reading, recording directly into the multitrack can sometimes be the most efficient way to do it, because it's easy to start getting things into individual separate pieces. So these are now separate pieces that I can play with, and we can see it because that track is soloed. The other ones are, it grays it out when I move it up there. So this can record the individual pieces. Challenge or warning, something to keep in mind while you're doing this. If I'm going to record at this point, I would encourage you to hit record and then start talking into the microphone. Give yourself a good second of emptiness before you start recording, and give yourself some time at the end. Because otherwise, what can happen as part of that is you will start talking to record as part of it and realize that you have missed the beginning part of what you were trying to record because the person started talking before it was ready to pick up what they were recording. So ideally, you want to get 1 to 2 seconds of emptiness at the beginning before the person starts talking. So if you know they're ready to record, you hit the button, you wait, and then you point to the person in the booth to acknowledge that it's time for them to start talking into the microphone. Force that time gap on them. Or if you're in the booth and you know that the person managing the computer isn't doing that, then you need to manage that yourself. And when they say go, you pause for a second, take a breath, and then start talking. But if you breathe in and start talking right away, you're going to end up with really bad audio. So that's something to keep in mind, because if I do that, and I'll demonstrate, and now I start talking right into the microphone. If I double click on this, it allows me to edit what's here. And you can hear the intake of breath, and immediately the voice starts up. Sometimes that breath will be right on the beginning syllable that is pronounced, and you won't be able to get rid of it, and it's a really ugly way for the beginning to start. So I would encourage you to make certain that you don't do that when you're doing the recording. I landed in this editing mode, so I'm not in the multitrack. We can see the multitrack disappeared. Now, if I click back to multitrack, it brings me back to the multitrack. But if I double click in this waveform, it gives me access to that file that I'm working with. And if I want to edit this and modify it and decide I don't want that intake of breath, I can just highlight, just using my mouse, click and drag, highlight, and hit delete. And now, because it's part of a multi-track, it says, oh, that could, wreck the world. And I say, yeah, I know, I don't care. I'm a big boy, I can handle it. I hit OK, it edits it. So at the end, let's see, what was that? There was something, I stopped the recording while I was still talking, but if I don't want to hear that, I can hit delete, and now that goes away. If I decide I need to get rid of something in the middle, highlight that, hit delete, it goes away, closes the gap. It's talking right in. So if I have a section here and just want to pull it down, I can pull it down by highlighting it and modifying it. So if I highlight right here, highlight, and then put my cursor right over those numbers, then you can see it reduces the intensity. Now it's talking right in, and now I still have the talking. Let's pull that down. It's talking right in. It's amazing, you can get rid of audio and it still almost sounds correct, except it starts to skip a little bit. So you can do basic edits. If you don't want something, highlight, delete. You can get back to your waveform or to your multitrack by choosing off the list or up here. If I stop soloing this, I see all the tracks. And We can do the envelopes for volume, envelopes for panning, hard pan or hard volume change individual tracks. So my voice here that I initially recorded, which mostly wasn't too loud except when I yelled in the microphone, I could take the whole track and then just boost it up a little bit to put more audio in. But you'll notice that this section right here, I wasn't speaking. What happened is the microphone picked up the ventilation in the room. When you're recording in the sound booths, we don't get as much of that. But if you try to turn it up, because your person is really shy and they won't talk in the microphone loud enough to be heard, they use their whispery voice because they're embarrassed of the sound of their own voice. Find new talent or encourage them to speak louder. If they speak louder, it will work better, so that you don't have to turn it up and then get a bunch of extra background noise occurring in the project.